Yes, welcome back to part 3 of the Bingolett. Now I thought I'd concentrate on the pins this week. Right, so the first thing I did was flip the machine onto its front. That whole chassis assembly, actually there's enough slack on the cable to move it, 3 or 4 bolts to remove it, they're mostly coloured red. And then we flip that forward and that reveals the grey pin assembly, that's where the ball bounces through. And 4 screws to hold that in, and we've removed that. And there's the rubber tubing on the pins, pretty decayed, isn't it? Hell of a state. They generally pull off, if you twist them slightly. And also it means you can gain access to all the contacts for the scoring slots on the front, and they should all just contact, slight gap between them, and then when the ball drops through they contact. So you might want to look at those as well. I'll say removing the tubing, but it does terrible state, aren't they? But it does leave a kind of residue on the pins, so advisable really to clean those with a bit of Scotch Brite and some warm soapy water. The best way to get these this rubber tubing off these sleeves is to just grip it there, not too tight, and just twist your pliers there, do the same there, and at the end, and then you should find you'll be able to pull that off, no problem. Don't forget to clean them afterwards. I mentioned earlier about these are for the slots that create the scores on this machine, and as each lever comes up there's 2 contacts there, like points in a car, and they just touch, and that's how you want them. So a very small thin feeler gauge in there, just slight drag on it, that's all. Make sure they're not touching, and the same all the way across. It'd be like a hair trigger then. Any ball drops through, it'll make the connection, make the score. So check those while you've got this off, because obviously you can't get to it once you've put that all back. Now you can gain access to the lower pins. There's 1 row just before these slots, basically, again with this rubber tubing on. 8mm nuts. They're in, well, there's 3 bars that you've got to remove altogether. 1, 2, 3. 2 8mm nuts on each. Undo them, take the tubing off, put the new tubing in, refit and put the nuts back on. So that's that job. A word of caution when working on a Bingolett or Rialto or a Tivoli. Is it Tivoli? I don't know. All very similar machines. And a lot of other Gunter Wulff machines is they use this you call white metal. It's got a percentage of zinc in it. It is incredibly brittle, so be very careful, when you're moving these things around. Put a little bit of stress on it and it'll break, and they also warp over time, so don't try and straighten it, or at least don't try and do it cold, or give it to somebody who knows what they're doing. But this stuff's the devil, it really is. On the whole, actually, I've looked around this machine, and I've got some handy, actually. Got some aluminium plate. I suppose because I've done so much 3D printing, I tend to see objects in their, their basic geometric shapes. And there's quite a few parts, including, oddly, the payout mechanism that I know I could make out of sheet aluminium, and it would be just as strong as this stuff, even, well, stronger, to be honest. But I know I could make one. I've looked at all the parts of that and I thought, yeah, I could make that out of sheet aluminium, the right thickness. So that's a possibility if you've got a part missing. The real difficulties are if you've got a solenoid missing, or you've got a solenoid that doesn't work, and you've got no idea what to replace it with. Oh, incidentally, a word of caution with the Bingolett and the Rialto. There are 2 main voltages in the machine. There's the 12-volt AC, which in my case I've converted to DC now, and there's 30-volt DC that powers a lot of things in the back. But there are a couple of things that are raw 240 volt, and one of those is the payout solenoid, because it takes quite a bit of effort to move the coin payout slide, and that's why it's 240 volts. So be careful working on it for that reason. There is mains in it. I don't particularly have that problem because like everything electrical, I shut it down before I work on it. Or if I have got to work on it live, then I make sure I use plastic implements, and I don't stand in a bucket of water, but just be careful, that's what I'm saying. And definitely don't stress any of these parts. Certainly when you take the chassis off the back, just be careful that you're not putting undue strain on the brackets. That's why I said lay it on its face and just gently ease things up, a millimetre at a time if need be, and then you won't damage anything. This is the hose I ordered to go over the pins. It's actually what it's described as is a red tint fuel line hose. It's the sort of thing you'd find on a strimmer, that sort of stuff, but it's only 2mm in diameter, and it's a nice tight fit on the pins. The thing is with these, when you come to coat them, what you don't want is a really bouncy rubber. Well, actually no, what you don't want is something like silicone, which will absorb the bounce, because bear in mind that these pins are made of spring steel, and really this tubing is really to protect the ball more than anything else, because it would wear it out otherwise. And so there's a little bit of give in it, but really the spring is in the actual pins itself. But I think they look great, really. It would have been nice if I could have got some in blue. I couldn't find any in blue, because then I could have done alternate rows probably. But anyway, that's what I came up with, and this is the dimensions. This is the length that you need to cut each hose, although I actually found I could push these on, just push on quite hard, and then just trim them off with a Stanley blade at the end, because you can see the pin inside anyway when you're cutting. But yeah, I think they come out great, and they should have just the right amount of bounce for the ball as it goes through. I've mentioned in the past just how important vernier gauges are, and for people that are not familiar with them, they measure precise widths. For instance, when I was calculating on the tubing on this, I can measure that and I know it's 2mm, so I know I need some tubing 2mm inside diameter. Now this was the coin tube. In other words, it stands up in the machine like that, and as the coins go through the machine, as people put money in and don't get much money back, as most amusement machines, it drops into this hopper, which is the payout hopper, and if you win, it'll dispense whatever amount of coins. If it fills up, it overflows and goes into the cash box for the amusement arcade owner. That's the way it is, right? This was the payout tube for the Bingolett, but as I mentioned in the last one, this has been totally butchered. And when I found it in the machine, let me explain. That's the payout. This is the mechanism that does it, right? I didn't show it very well in the last video, so I will now. As the coins drop in down the tube, they sit on that plate, and then an electric solenoid pulls that back and then pushes it, and it drops out just offset here into the payout tube, right, into the cup at the front of the machine. That's how it works. But generally, if you're getting paid, say 4 coins, it will go 1, 2, 3, 4. You hear it on a lot of amusement arcades. Now, this is where the vernier gauges come in handy, because firstly, I needed to replace that. So the only thing I could find that would accept a 20p coin, and this does, it doesn't matter what angle I drop the 20p in, it will always land flat at the bottom. In other words, the inside dimension of that is just spot on. If it was slightly smaller, they would get stuck. and it can't be too big because it's got to fit in there, right? And it also has to fit in a clamp. You see it's in two halves at the top of the machine, right, like that. I can't put it in because of this wire in here, but I've measured the width across that. I've measured the width across that. It's 25mm. I could not get a piece of tubing 25mm that was about 1mm wall thickness. If it's 2mm, which is what most of them are, the 20p is not going to fit down it. This is the sort of problems you have. So and this tube actually is 25.4mm. It's 1/2 mil too big to fit in there. 1/2 mil too big to fit in the clamp, but it's perfect for the 20p coin. So the only thing I can do is ask my friend Graham, very kindly, who I went to school with. He's good, he's got a lathe, and I'm sure he'll help me out on this one. I need him to put it on the lathe and turn. The depth of that is about 1 centimetre, so I need 1 centimetre this end turned down to 25mm. Are you following me? And at the same at the top for the clamp. Now I could not work that out by eye. You need a vernier gauge, and the good thing about a vernier gauge is you can measure outside dimensions. Yeah, 25.4-ish. And also, it'll measure, I'll flip it round the other way, it'll measure inside diameters as well. Sometimes you've got to be very precise. But I'm going to show you how well this tube does with 20, because 20p coins, right, they drop through it easily. And every time I drop one in, always ends up flat at the bottom. So that tube is perfect for 20p's. When this thing was in the machine, it wasn't sitting in the cup, it was sitting on top of it and held round with sellotape. I think the reason it was is because I've tried a 10p down it, it gets wedged. The only other coin that they could have used, which is bigger than a 20p, is a threepenny bit. So this machine originally ran on threepenny bits, and they cut it down the middle with a hacksaw and opened it up to make it fit. That's what I call a bodge job. This is not going to be a bodge job, but it does mean that I have to call in outside help. I think if I had a lathe at home, it would save me a lot of time actually, but at the moment I can't warrant the cost of, I don't know, £300 or £400 for a lathe that I'm not going to use an awful lot. It would be better really to take it to Graham because he can whittle it off. But there, I just thought I'd show you that on the payout tube. And also, during the week, I was browsing eBay and found 2 other payout mechanisms that come from a fruit machine. I don't know what coin they accept, possibly 50p's, I don't know. But there were a pair of them, untested it said, but came out of a good machine, with the solenoids on the end, £30 for 2. So I thought I'll have those, because if I get any problems with this, I could at least change it. Or if I get any other machine with a payout problem, I've got a payout mechanism. But there you go. Sometimes you've got to think outside the box. But certainly if you're going to work on anything like this, you need one of those. I've got to print a few of these. These are the shields for the bulbs at the top, so they light up each number and they're separate. Do you see what I mean? No problem 3D printing that, but what I will have to do is measure it accurately. So I'll need the length, the width, the height, I'll need the thickness of the plastic. It's pretty uniform all the way around. Basically I'm just sticking boxes together. and also measure the centres of these, and then I can position those afterwards. Yeah, I think this will work out rather well. The other thing, when you're lubricating old arcade machines, highly recommend these. They're actually meant for watchmakers, but you know, and 3-in-1 oil's fine, but the trouble is you end up putting far too much on, whereas with this, just give it a gentle squeeze and you've got on just enough. Don't use WD-40. Despite all the hype, it's just a water dispersant. It's not a very good lubricant at all, and certainly not for rusted nuts and bolts. Useless. This stuff's quite good. And then also, what's the other one? Oh yeah, scaffies, which scaffolders use. If you get anything that's seized, oh boy, that stuff will shift it. But it's not available to the public, which seems a bit bizarre really. I'm amazed that they haven't canned that. Anyway, yeah, definitely get yourself one of these. It's just a fine metal tube at the bottom, but it gives you far more control when it comes to oiling things. Also, if yours is fitted to a wall and you've opened it up and you're looking at the right hand part of the machine, and where's the cam and the motor is this end, these brackets, I didn't realise until I unbolted everything, they're hinges. So that means that this whole assembly, once you've unbolted it from that side, just lift it up and it will come off. Mind you, you've still got to stand it somewhere because you've still got all these cables. So, but you could, in theory, yeah, you could just disconnect this plug and that whole chassis will come out as one. So undo the bolts that side, lift it up once you've undone this plug, and you can take this away and put it on the bench, which is quite useful. But it also means that when the machine's on the wall, if you need to work on the reverse of this, you know, like those contacts, that sort of stuff, you can get to them. So you just hinge the whole thing one way. I guess the guys who serviced these and did them all the time knew all this. But I'm just giving you a heads up so you don't fall into the same trap that I did. Since episode 1, I've started to grasp how the coin mechanism works, and it looks somewhat complex. As I said, originally it took threepenny bits, and I think it would still work on threepenny bits, but as I said, I'm using 20p's. Seems a better price by today's standards. The coin enters through the top of this mechanism, and it can go one of 3 ways. If it's a complete reject, in theory, it drops through here and it exits there and outside the machine and sits there waiting for you to take it out again. I say in theory. If it's a 20p that it accepts, it can go one of 2 ways. It can come out here, there's a slot here. That will end up in the coin tube, ready for payouts. Obviously for payouts, you've got to have enough money in the machine for it to pay it out. So most of the time they will exit here, but occasionally that coin tube, particularly if there's not been any payouts for a while and people have been putting money in it, it will really stack up. And there's a piece of wire that sits in the tube, and if it's sort of bent, I'll make it sort of simple, into a half circle if you like, this end of the wire sits in the tube. If the tube fills up, this wire gets pushed out, and as it gets pushed out, it gets pushed right into the middle of this hole here. And what happens is, when that wire is in there, as the coin comes down the mechanism, it is diverted straight into the cash box at the top of the machine if the wire's out, and it will only do that if the coin tube isn't full. Then the coin will drop straight down here. Now here's the second part of it. If we put a 20p in, because normally it would roll down here, watch what happens. It drops into that position, and the reason it's held there initially is, you see, this thing is now down at the bottom, and when this comes up, this operates a micro switch here. So in other words, the coin mechanism saying, okay, there's 20p in it, you can start. The micro switch then powers a motor and a cam to the right of this, which in turn will then push this and the coin drops out the bottom into the coin tube. And that's how it works in a nutshell. When I've actually got the coin mechanism in the machine, I've got everything running, which will probably be next week. I will explain the coin mechanism in more detail, because I'd looked at other Bingolets and I hadn't got a clue how this thing worked. But over time, as I've literally been sitting there some evenings just dropping coins through this and seeing how things work, it's now starting to make sense. So I might as well pass that on to anybody else who's got a Bingolett or Rialto, or indeed a similar coin mechanism to this. There's a saying, isn't there? All the best laid plans. And you know, I was messing about with this aluminium tube for the coin hopper, and I was going to drop that over to my friend Graham so we whittle it down. In fact, a couple of people volunteered to do it. Well, check this out. No, not a banana. I was on my way into work today and dropped into, in the UK it's called Wicks, but I suppose you got DIY stores wherever you are in the world. But they got this stuff, and it's meant for wardrobes, you know, the sort of thing that you put your coat hangers on. And they, unbelievably, they're all 25mm and chrome finish as well. So when I came home today, I cut off a length and it fits in perfect. Look at that. Fits in the clamp, fits in the hole perfectly. The only thing that's missing is, on the original, it's got holes drilled so that you can see where the coins are, and also it needs a slot sort of towards the top. That's for the sensor. It's just a wire sensor. Just tells it how you know, whether it's running a bit low or not. So I've put some masking tape on this side, marked it with a marker pen where the holes need to go. There's two there close together because those ones need to be close, because I've got to turn that into a slot for the wire that goes in there. It just senses whether the coins have dropped below a certain level. It's actually upside down in this at the moment, but that's all I've got to do. 8mm holes, they'll do absolutely perfectly. So it just shows you sometimes you've got to think laterally, haven't you? Well, I think we'll bring part 3 of the Gunter Wulff Bingolett to a close. We've now got a brand new coin tube. I've drilled holes in it so that, you know, you can check where the 20p's are if they're running too short. I drilled 2 there and squared them out with a Dremel so that, you know, this whole mechanism works. I'll need to tweak that obviously when it's in the machine, decide just how much bend I need in the wire for it to all work. But yeah, that's come out well, I think. So that's largely the electromechanical. In the next one, part 4, we'll fire the thing up, see if there's any faults with it, and if there is, we'll resolve those, and we'll look at putting some temporary kind of glass in. I'll try and get a sheet of perspex cut, something like that, so that, you know, we can actually see the whole thing in operation. And we will have progressed a long way. The other thing that's missing is the very back of the case needs a sheet of plywood. I would imagine that they couldn't find the locks to open this machine to get it off the wall, so they virtually pulled it off. So I need to make a new back for it. I need to make a new, what you would call kind of like a cashier's box. Everything that doesn't go through here ends up in a box at the back of the machine. I need to make one of those, sheet alley, I think, something like that, or something like a cut biscuit tin. I'll think of something. But there we go, and thanks for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.